It took him 3 years to recover from that, genuinely. Welcome back to the Unchained Binge podcast, everybody. I'm Caley Fretz. This is the podcast where we break apart Netflix's Unchained Tour de France series into many little pieces, and then we put them back together for you with hopefully a little bit more context. Joining me today, Jonny Long. How are you?
Allez, les gars.
Allez, les gars. And Kit Nicholson. Welcome.
Hello.
We touched on this on the in the previous episode, in episode 1, but we do know what we're talking about, right? Do you guys know what you're talking about?
Some of the time.
Depends what you're talking about. I don't know. We don't like a lot of the time. We don't know how they're riding their bikes that fast, or why. But we know we try to become attuned to how they feel about things while they're doing it. Like, we're there after the race, staring into their souls as they warm down outside of the team bus. Not that you'd know it from the Netflix documentary, though, because the biggest disappointment of the whole 3 seasons, at least so far, because we're only 2 episodes into the final one, is I've only seen myself on camera like twice, and both times I've been wearing like a hat and sunglasses and a mask, because a lot of it was COVID. So it's like a Where's Wally picture. It sucks.
One of them was us walking across a parking lot, but from a drone shot. So it was like 200 feet above him. And we only recognized ourselves because our former colleague was wearing a fedora. And we were like, wait, we know that fedora.
And reporters that we know have, like in this series, Gregor Brown, who's at Flow Bikes, I'm hearing his voice all the time. And every time there's a tiny little dagger in my heart. Other people there, like Chris Marshall-Bell, our friend and colleague, he's there with his phone in the first episode.
Chris may actually join us for one of these episodes.
Nice.
We'll see. Either maybe episode 4. We'll see. Anyway, let's get to episode 2. I just wanted. We didn't really talk about ourselves that much, and I am aware that there are folks listening to this that don't listen to our regular podcast, which is called Spin Cycle. Of course, we make daily Tour de France podcasts all of July across the Tour de France and Tour de France Femme, and you should definitely go and subscribe to Spin Cycle and make sure you get those. But let's talk about episode 2. The title of this episode is The Disruptors, and it is quite simply about the 2 riders who may or may not be able to topple the top 2, which would be Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogačar. So we started episode 1 with a relatively simple question. I think maybe we'll start episode 2 with a relatively simple question. Is this possible?
What time frame are you given?
Is it possible that either of these 2 riders, Roglic or Remco Evenepoel, who are the 2 that this episode focuses on, is it really genuinely possible that they might win the Tour de France?
Let's do what we did last episode and look at what had happened up to this point in the season for these 2. So Roglic had potentially the rather better run-up, only because Evenepoel had been caught up in that crash at Itzulia as well. He broke his collarbone and some ribs, so not as bad of injuries as Vingegaard, but his season had been significantly disrupted. His first race back was the Dauphiné, which is the Critérium du Dauphiné, which is run by the Tour de France and is the kind of the premier warm-up, build-up, tune-up race for the Tour. And Roglic was also there. Roglic won that race. So Roglic was coming into this with some good form and, crucially, a new team which was fully backing him to go for Tour de France glory. Because previously he'd been at Jumbo-Visma, Visma-Lease bike. There was one erroneous point in the episode when somebody asked him, one of the Netflix interviewers said, well, how did you feel about never being the leader at Visma, which was absolutely categorically untrue, because he had been the leader for a number of years. Until he crashed and Vingegaard suddenly appeared as the prodigal son at one of the tours that he crashed out of, in fact. Roglic, I mean. So before the 2024 Tour, Remco had never raced the Tour de France yet before, and typically that is a guarantee that they shall not win their first. He had though won of Vuelta.
Unless we can. Pogacar.
Unless it, no, he'd won. Oh yes, this is true. Yes, and so for in a similar way, Remco had already done a bunch of a couple of Giro. No, he crashed out of the Giro or illness out of the Giro and won the Vuelta. Yeah. Now we can. This isn't the place to discuss whether that Vuelta was really something he had to fight too hard for, or was it a hard? Could it be put in the same? He did still win it, but it was not a hard. It was not one of the hardest Vueltas.
He's won 100% more Vueltas than I have.
Yeah, this is true. Ditto.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he had proven himself over Grand Tour distance length races. So he wasn't not going to do anything. He was going to present some sort of argument. But he like Vingegaard, he was coming off injury, and he had seemed to struggle in the mountains at the Dauphiné.
With the narrative of it always being a 2-horse race, right? Because we had Vingegaard winning the previous 2 tours, and then before that we had Pogacar winning the 2 before that. But then the first one was when it was him versus Roglic.
Yes.
Yep.
But even
the second one was meant to be also, but that was the race.
True.
Right? Yeah.
But still, that it's been the rivalry that's defined the era, and so there was definitely a lot of excitement about it maybe becoming a broader race or a broader contest for the general classification that would also see maybe some different tactics come into play, because the most exciting GC moment of the previous few tours has been when we've had Roglic involved with the battle with Vingegaard and Pogacar, which ultimately cracked Pogacar to help Vingegaard win that tour.
But but it was only one team against another. True. So in this situation, we had multiple teams, so you couldn't just watch. Pogacar had to watch more than just the Visma jerseys, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I guess part of the optimism, and I say optimism in terms of like, as people who create content around professional cycling,
I just want to watch good bike races
and want to watch good bike racing. We were optimistic that it would be more than just the 2 riders. And part of that was what we mentioned in episode 1, which is that neither of the top 2, this is the key fact here, neither of the top 2 were seen to be 100%. Because we had Vingegaard coming off of his crash and Pogacar coming off of the Giro with fatigue. And so it was like, there's an opportunity here. There's a golden opportunity. This is potentially, I think we said this in our Spin Cycle podcast in the lead up to last year's race, potentially the last chance for Roglic to win a Tour de France, right? And I think that was probably correct. He didn't, spoiler, but it was probably genuinely his last chance to do so. So let's talk about these 2 riders, because we get background. And let's start with Remco, actually, because we get a little bit more background, I think, on him. Yeah. We get more kind of like, who is this individual? And I think part of the reason we don't get as much on Roglic is they've done it in previous seasons, and they're kind of assuming that you've seen this before.
The way that they're portraying Roglic, he does it all himself, with all the winks and the silly asides. And he's playing a joker, and they don't need to add anything.
He didn't always used to be like this either.
No, he didn't. No,
he used to be the most boring man in pro cycling. And in the last 2 years, I think he keeps crashing out of bike races. And I just said we're going to talk about Remco, but let's talk about Roglic. We've gone that direction.
Sorry, yeah.
He keeps crashing out of bike races. He's come so close and yet been so far. He had a Tour de France ripped away from him on Planche de Belfi by Tadej Pogacar. Penultimate stage of the 2021, right? Tour de France? And 22? 2020? Jesus.
Yeah,
time's a flat circle. So 2020 Tour de France, Planche de Belfi, final time trial. There's this an eminently memeable moment in which
it's so good.
Roglic is put on a new time trial helmet. It doesn't appear to fit.
No.
It looks like a swinging bin lid without the swing bit on it.
And he's riding for a team that is notorious for being fastidious, and they have just screwed this one up. And he didn't lose because of the helmet, let's be honest. But it was just it was a visual.
It adds to the goofy,
Yeah, he just looked like an absolute goof going up this big climb. And the time trial itself was a bunch of flat and then up a big mountain. And Pogacar was just reeling back time the entire day, and then by the top, it was very clear that Pogacar had taken the yellow jersey. Roglic had gone into that stage. He's a good time trialist. He had gone into that stage thinking he was winning the Tour de France.
Yeah.
and then he didn't. And I think it took him 3 years to recover from that, genuinely. But then, I don't know what mental, emotional transformation he is.
Well, he won the Giro. He won the Giro in the way that he lost the Tour. So it completed the redemption arc, didn't it?
It did, but like beyond that, he just seems maybe that was the moment. But it felt to me like it had been something that had been sort of in process over a year or two, and he is a completely different person than when we first started interacting with him. And I'm not just talking about because he's Slovenian, and so English is obviously not his first language, and so early on he we're mostly I don't speak Slovenian personally, and so we're mostly trying to converse with him in English. That was maybe part of it, but I would even talk to our Slovenian colleagues who would be like, no, he's the most boring man alive. And he has completely shifted that in the last year or two. And in this show, it's so obvious that he's having a grand old time and is not feeling, I think, any particular pressure. That's true.
He's getting a massive salary where they saved up for a big rider when they became available, which Roglic did after deciding not to want to fight with Jonas Vingegaard for the place. The weird thing, though, that we found out, I think only towards the end of 2024, was that by this point, when they're making a big song and dance about Red Bull, because Red Bull joined for the Tour de France, that's when they got unveiled as like a partner, having acquired the team, but they hadn't put any serious money in until this year. So they're talking about this team as a disruptor, but they're jumping the gun a bit because at this point there was still a lot of, the money's only just coming in, they're setting up the new processes, investing in the team, but for all intents and purposes, they were just Bora Hansgrohe with Red Bull kit on.
Yeah, the only thing that they had spent money on was the very slick presentation, which we see a whole bunch of clips of, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't make a team better. That's just like present the new team next to some very expensive looking F1 cars. Like that was pretty much all that they had done so far. And I think even if we are going to talk about sort of the reality of today, the sort of this notion that this was about to be the next super team was, at least as of today, middle of June 2025, misguided because that team has really struggled to do anything.
Still a work in progress.
It's very much still a work in progress. And so I think the presentation of it as that, okay, you've got UAE with the money, you've got Visma with the money and the marginal gains, and you've got Red Bull with the money and the what else do they bring?
So the cans of Red Bull in front of them, the brand.
Yeah.
It shows the power of the Red Bull marketing, to be honest.
And genuinely all the things that come with that, which is like the Red Bull Performance Center and all the things that they do with their football clubs and all these other things. In theory, there is quite a bit of power there. So if we're sticking on Roglic here, we've talked about his sort of a bit of an origin story. There is an ongoing joke, which I have to mention, and I apologize to folks who are watching cycling more frequently. He used to be a ski jumper. He was like he was an elite level ski jumper.
For a second.
Well, you can tell they do show him on roller skates, and you can tell he knows how to use that motion, the skiing motion. I know that you don't use that motion when you're doing a ski jump, but he grew up on skis.
Yeah, but a skier's a skier. Yeah.
Not to derail us from what you're about to say, Caley, but you brought up Kit. Roglic rollerblading is a heart and mouth moment for those who know Primoz Roglic and his.
He looked much more stable on the roller skates than he did.
He did. You know who didn't? You know who didn't, but also and who looked like pretty okay with falling over. His son.
Yeah,
it's something in the genes.
Lev Roglic, look out.
Lev Roglic. I've got a story about Lev Roglic and his mother, which I'll save for after dark.
Ooh. Lev Roglic is always on the podium as well.
Yeah,
he's good at his dad's podium celebration.
He's having a good childhood, Lev Roglic.
Yes, I reckon so.
I reckon he's having a good one. I reckon he gets good Christmas presents.
So what you're alluding to there, just to provide a bit of context, is the fact that Roglic falls down all the time.
Roglic fall down.
Roglic fall down.
GIF. Many GIF.
Roglic fall down to final, edit final.
He's become he's become a sort of not literally fallen hero, but cycling loves the heroes who don't quite make it, right?
That's what it's why the French probably quite like to portray Roglic, actually.
Yeah, it's the same as Thibaut Pinot. It's the same as Raymond Poulidor, Mathieu van der Poel's grandfather. They like the riders who just don't quite achieve it all. I don't know what that says about the cycle or whatever, but there was a great line from when Roglic lost the Tour de France where L'Equipe's top writer described Roglic as a fridge freezer who'd suddenly developed feelings because he was so cold and inaccessible. But then now Roglic had to trade eternal Tour de France glory for everyone seeing him as like a genuinely nice, chill dude. Which I think that's the greater prize.
Yeah.
He seems fun. He seems unbothered by any of the pretense. He's like, I've probably made enough money now that I can just stick it in a decent rate savings account, and me and my family are going to be all right. And I'll try and win the Tour, but if it doesn't happen, that's probably fine. But it's not fine for the people paying him and his sports directors.
We need to get ahead of some of the memes that are going to come out of this, right? So like, because we're watching early. We have media screeners, and so we're watching early. So like the Roglic eyebrows, for example.
Oh yeah.
We need to have that one ready for launch day, so we can start rolling these out before any of the meme lords can do so. Right. I want Roglic eyebrows anytime.
Yeah.
I can just send to staff. When you send me something that I'm like, I'm not so sure about
okay, and in response to that, I want the Rolf Oldag looking stressed in a team car of him just being like there like, oh my God. The one, I think this was soon after the roller skate scene, was we hear Roglic talking about how he's the old guy racing with young kids, but he's super fast on the scent because he doesn't really care that much. But I'm hoping that's sort of lost in translation. Of him hanging out with his beautiful young family, being like, if I fall off this mountain, you know what, doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because usually we hear the opposite. It's like, I've got to be, I've had a crash. Actually, I'm slightly nervous now because, I've got to, when I take risks, there's actually a...
Well, that's what we hear from Jonas.
Exactly,
yeah. So interesting that's how Roglic views himself. Because,
but like Caley has said, Roglic is a daredevil at heart.
Yeah.
So he's quite happy, and it's in the genes, as you've said. It's in the genes to fall down.
Have you two ever seen a ski
jumping? Yeah, it's
yes,
ridiculous.
We saw it. I saw it at the tour.
That's right.
Because there was they had like an artificial slope after one of the stages, so we watched people come down it, and it's crazy. Don't understand it. Like obviously there's no point to anything really if you think about it that long, but especially ski jumping seems just completely superfluous to the human existence.
So we've got this one character who, again, used to be a fridge freezer with feelings and has now turned into Eyebrow Man. And I very much have appreciated this development because I think he's much more fun. And in fact, as we record this, we're about a week and a half, 2 weeks away from the 2025 Tour de France, and he's going to be there. And I am now much more excited about him being there than I was a week ago.
I'd like to see him.
Yeah. I want to see the eyebrows. I'm going to go up to him and ask for the eyebrows is what I'm going to do. So let's move over to the other protagonist of episode 2 here, the other individual who may be able to take it to Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogacar. And his secret weapon is the time trial, right? He's got aerodynamic
football history.
He's got aerodynamic skin, et cetera, et cetera. I think the football history is just like, if you're creating this for a European audience, it gives them credibility as an athlete. I think that's kind of part of it. So we get a bit of his football, soccer background, the fact that he was a very good player at one point.
His dad was
which
a pro
is surprising.
As well.
He's got a massive engine. He probably just ran constantly, right? If he just never stopped running, that's part of being a decent football player. So we get a bit of both of them kind of like in their kitchens, in their houses. We see with Remco, we see more sort of expensive vehicles and things. What else do we learn about Remco in this episode?
Well, he comes across as quite a sweet kid. I think that's one of the things that stood out to me was especially when you do put him opposite Roglic, and not that Roglic. We've got the Joker in Roglic, and then we've got this young kid, the whippersnapper, the up and comer, and so you do get some of the he's an athlete. He has been an athlete for as long as he has memories, probably. He's so
had
you get that
hair for a while.
Yeah. But you also get and I do, that stage when he struggled on the descent. I didn't remember him having that much struggles, but then of course you do see he did say he was less confident in the interview, but they really seem to lean into obviously the lack of experience is a thing, but they lean into his nerves and his lack of confidence, which I did kind of believe to a degree, but at the same time they were framing him as this quite nervous character almost.
Yeah, he's a supremely confident young man who has had the media spotlight on him from the age of 17, 18.
Well, he won San Sebastian at 18.
Yeah, so before that, yeah. Crazy.
He won the Junior World Championships. He had I forget whether it was a mechanical or a crash, and he was like minutes behind the front of the bike race and just rode by himself up through the entirety of the field and then off the front. And he was much better than everybody else in his age group that it was they were in different races. He's a phenomenal talent. And to be clear, generally when riders are going to be in the conversation for a Tour de France, that's how they start. It's very obvious very early. Which this is a separate topic, but Jonas Vingegaard is not necessarily like that.
That's
one of the interesting
he
things.
Became the leader by accident because Roglic fell down in 2021, and then he finished second.
Yeah. So Remco, what else did we learn about?
We discovered that the true pain and suffering of being a professional cyclist is that when you have your bolt hole on the sunny south coast of Spain or wherever it happens to be, you don't really have that much time necessarily or want to do much interior design, which leaves you with the most soulless, wipe clean looking kitchen
it looks exactly
that
the
mankind
same
has ever. Yeah. Oh, just like, okay, you've gone out for like a 5 or 6 hour bike ride, right? When you're training out there and you're living like a monk and whatever, and then you go into that kitchen to prepare not enough food because you're trying to keep your weight down, and then there is just nothing is giving you sparking joy. It's like living in maybe it was an Airbnb, but I presume he has a place there, because they do a lot of it was Alicante way, wasn't it? Which
Calpe.
That's Calpe. That's where they have their base because it's good climbing, good weather most of the year round, and that just made me feel the most sympathy I've ever felt for a multi-millionaire. Is that he has to sit in that kitchen. And for the people who've listened to previous seasons, I have been obsessed with Wout van Aert's increasingly large kitchen as he gets bigger and bigger salaries. Whereas Remco Evenepoel probably gets paid more than Wout van Aert, and yet maybe it's a sign of age, right? Because he's still in his early 20s, him and his wife. So, and at that age, I didn't really care about kitchens either. So maybe they're just not in their kitchen area yet. But that was my main takeaway aside from Remco Evenepoel at the bike race.
They don't really explain why they're down there.
No, not really. Yeah, you have to know why they are suddenly there, and they talk about wanting to go back to Belgium, which fair enough. I mean, a lot of the time.
So they're down there because the pressure put upon Belgian champion cyclists is so far beyond immense.
Yeah,
it is crushing is the right term. This is a country where cycling is the second biggest sport, and not by much, to football, soccer. There are entire TV shows dedicated to cycling. It is a
tabloids. The riders are tabloid fodder.
They're absolutely tabloid fodder. And
when you retire, you still get called up for every controversy that happens, even if it's not connected to you.
One Belgian rider, I think it might have been Oliver Narsson, who we do meet actually in a future episode. I think he once told me that one day he woke up and looked out of his the doors or windows leading into his garden, and there was just a couple of people standing there. So he went out and was like, "What are you doing in my garden?" He's like, "Oh, we heard that this was your house. We're just having a look around." And he was like, "Get out!" It's a country of 8 million people where literally everyone does know your name because there's not many people, but also just over familiar to an extent, which is you would maybe then decide to go and live on the Costa del Sol and train in nice weather and with good climbs, because Belgium can be quite flat.
Yes, and Oliver Nassen is also basically anonymous relative to Remco Evenepoel.
Yeah,
right.
Yes,
like it is
exactly.
a totally different level of fame, and so basically he was not scared down to Spain, but like ran away down to Spain to get away from.
Done.
He couldn't train.
Because
you
go out on your bike, and then people just join you because you are in your team kit and you're going really fast.
So that's why he's down there, right?
Yeah.
The weather, yes, of course, all these things, but I think that context and the Belgian context is actually quite important for him as an individual. It's like, it's not like, I think a lot of our listeners will probably be Anglophones of some kind, English, American, Aussie, whatever. If any of our three countries ended up with sort of a Remco Evenepoel level talent, they would go home and no one would have any idea who they were.
Yeah.
And that is not the case for him. And I think that informs the way that he acts and the way that he races and the way that he's portrayed in this show.
I think that's where the nerves come from as well for him, is that it's the nerves of living up to everyone else's expectations, which, to his credit so far, has not limited him in overachieving. Because what we don't see after, he's already won World Championships by the time that he's at the Tour de France, but then he goes on later that summer to win both Olympic the road race and the time trial, 2 gold medals, which is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. And I think that there's still today, we're like I said, we're coming into the following year's tour from what is shown in Unchained. And there is still today, there's the train going by my house, which if you listen regularly, you will get to know. There's still today, there's still today a big question mark over whether he can do this. Just as there was in the beginning of last year's tour, we had the question mark. It was like halfway answered because he was close. He was the closest of those that were giving it a shot. Yeah. And then we've got this year where the Dauphiné was last week. He wins the time trial handily. But then he gets, his face kicked in on the climbs later. I think there's still a big question mark as to whether he can truly do this.
Yeah.
Well, because he has the engine, but he also, so specifically it's those long climbs, the consecutive long climbs at altitude that he has always struggled with. He's got the, as a time trialist, he can do the closer to sea level repeated climbs. He's got a really good punch, so he can do steep climbs as well. But it's when they get stacked up in the Pyrenees and the Alps in the last week and a bit of the tour that we've yet to see. And he can't, and he could beat almost everyone, but there are 2 in particular. We didn't really, there are 2 in particular that he's struggled to match.
Can I talk physics just for a moment?
Please. I love talking physics.
Just to kind of explain why, like how that could be. Like, how could you be strong enough here and not strong enough there, right? So, in a time trial, which, as I said, is kind of his superpower, he's among the fastest. You are essentially looking at watts, which is the amount of power that a rider is putting out, versus it's called CDA, their aerodynamic drag, right? So, if you have more watts and less CDA, you go faster. Sort of simplifying it. He has an incredibly low CDA. So he's incredibly aerodynamic. Just his body shape, like it's not stuff you can necessarily train. It's not a fit. It's like he was just gifted with a shoulder width to hip width that makes him incredibly, incredibly fast.
Well, as our friend Jonathan Vaughters said, aero missile.
Yeah.
He's built for it.
So he has a lot of watts, obviously, but part of what makes him so good in that scenario is the fact that the CDA is very, very low.
Yeah.
When you get into the high mountains, like we see in this episode over the Galibier, when you get into the high mountains, the physics shifts from watts per CDA to watts per kilogram or weight, because then you're fighting gravity, not so much aerodynamics. Although these guys go so fast that the CDA actually still matters, because they're going like 25, 27K an hour up these freaking climbs, which is absolute madness. But they're not going 50K an hour, right? So once that math shifts, he loses that advantage, and he still has the watts. He still has a lot of watts, but maybe the watts per kilo isn't quite what Pogačar is or quite what Vingegaard is. And so that is essentially the underlying question is like, can he figure out that side of the physics, because that's basically what a lot of bike racing comes down to is kind of those two numbers. And I think that we're still, like I said, we're still kind of, that's up in the air. We don't know the answer to that question yet. But we know that he's got the watts, and if he can figure out the rest of it, then he could be there.
And he's got the benefit of time because he's younger than the other two. Much younger than Jonas Vingegaard. And then Tadej Pogačar has, hinted that he might just stop racing when he gets bored of it all. So that
which could be any time.
Which could be at any time.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Once he's got 5 or 6 Tours de France.
Yeah, he's got the stage record and all that malarkey. So I wouldn't be surprised if Evenepoel eventually wins the Tour de France. If you're gonna,
yeah, I agree.
If you're gonna bet either way, I would be comfortable betting yes. Another note we've got down here while we're on Evenepoel, but taking us back from the serious racing chat, is someone's written we still have the horrible partner chats, which I think is alluding to the kitchen scene when Remco is forced to have a fake, well, maybe it's a real breakfast, but eat breakfast in front of the camera with his wife Umi. And yes, it's unsettling because you're witnessing two people being forced to have an unnatural conversation they would never have, and the result is it seems like they've never met each other before in their lives. And I don't know what exactly it adds because we don't necessarily get to know about them as people or a couple.
Yeah.
Is it just to prove that like he has a wife, or he knows other people that aren't bike racers, or
I have no idea.
I don't really know what we got out of that.
Yeah.
When they're done well, they're great, but that was poorly done.
Well, and I think across this entire series and 2 previous series, I'm trying to think of one that's been done really, really well. Like
they're also carbon copies of one another. There's never anything unique.
Yeah. What's hard for you, sweetheart? What do you? Are you
let's
confident?
Talk about
Are you brave?
Let's talk about bike racing because we never talk about bike racing at home.
Well, do you feel ready for the tour? Well, it's next week, so.
Hope so.
I want real. I want real conversation. I want like Remco to get back from a 6-hour train ride, and Umi's like, "Did you get the milk I asked you to get?" And he's like, "Oh, fuck." And he has to, and he just turns around and head back out. That'd be way more humanising. This so we saw that with Jasper Philipsen at home in the last season when he would just keep forgetting his shoes and stuff, and that was like one of the highlights of the series for me.
Yep. I don't think we got much. I feel like we got a better look at Roglic's personality today than Remco's personality, which again is potentially related to how guarded he feels like he needs to be, and the fact that he's had to run away from his country because his countrymen are insane about his sport. But still, it's like we didn't gain much, and I think that's fundamentally that's what I always hope for out of this series. Is that this is access that we as sort of cycling media, cycling journalists don't tend to get, right? I've never had breakfast with Remco and Umi. And so you hope for, not that I can recall anyway. You hope for something more than that. And I think I was a little bit disappointed with that particular section. And it's not anybody's fault. It's like they're not actors. I'm not asking for them.
They're playing the game. Remco's already had to develop his his media side, his celebrity side from a young age. So now he just easily slips into it. Whereas Roglic suddenly was a superstar cyclist who at first didn't know how to act, and so was very closed up. It's actually quite an interesting comparison having these two in the episode as the challengers, because they've come at this from completely different ends. And then as soon as Roglic had kind of had his time in the sun and was on the way down, he then figured out that he could be a real person.
Yeah, we should get Kate to write about this particular dynamic. I think that would be fun.
Yes.
For those who don't know what I'm talking about, Kate Wagner, who's a contributor at Escape Collective.
McMansion Hell, you might know her as.
Yeah, McMansion Hell, if you follow her on Twitter. We should get Kate to write about this. Anyway.
Yeah.
I think we should maybe pick some... Actually, I'm not going to...
we should actually mention that we met another team manager in this episode. Well, we met 2, but we met one in particular. Patrick Lefebvre.
Oh yeah,
who had a couple of great nuggets, and Uldag, but and we've met them both before, and Uldag didn't really have very much to say apart from yes, I have bought Roglic, but Lefebvre had two great quotes, which one was, "I've discovered a champion who's going to change the world." The other was a winner of the Tour de France is born every 10 years, which was an interesting... I want to see
his workings out on that. If he wants to get full marks on the exam.
But no, he came across as a bit more human and a bit more kind of, I don't know. At least it didn't take as long to establish his character that we've seen in the past. And so at the start he was just kind of he was leaning back early in the episode, just kind of slightly crusty, just this guy Evenepoel, you're going to love him. He's going to change the world. And then later in the episode, he's wandering around the paddock during the tour, and they're saying, "Are you happy, Lefebvre?" He's like, "Can't you tell?"
Yeah, and he was also drinking wine a lot of the time, wasn't he?
In Corrections Corner,
loves a good. One of my favorite things we're talking about. First Corrections Corner. There have been 5 winners of the Tour de France in the last decade, so there are 5 winners of the Tour de France born every 10 years, just based in the last 10 years. Quick Corrections Corner. On Lefebvre himself, I think one of the reasons we love to hate him, right? Yeah. One, he's done a bunch of like dumb misogynistic shit over the last 20 years. The list is long. I don't feel like
go on his Wikipedia page. He's probably got a controversies tab. That's when you know.
We've talked about it numerous times. He's like.
Yeah,
he's an old.
He retired at the end of 2025 as well. Retired from his other teams.
Yep. That said, that stuff aside, because that is what it is, and
you're asking an old Belgian man to not be an old Belgian man, even if that sounds harsh. That is the truth.
It's basically. We're not excusing it. It's just not the subject of what we're talking about. What we're talking about is for me, he's sort of this like. He is, to give him credit, like sporting credit. He's run teams with about the same amount of money as a lot of the French general managers that we've seen. And he has been orders of magnitude more successful at doing that. And it puts into perspective your Vincent Lavenue and your Hubert and your...
The ineptitude.
The like relative ineptitude of those teams. Now, granted, he had some advantages in that, like, he wasn't chasing the Tour de France; he was chasing classics. Yeah. He had those type of riders. He's building a team in a country.
You can actually have half a dozen riders going after one goal rather than one.
Yeah, and he's pulling from Belgium, which is creating many of the best riders in the world, whereas France has not created many of the best riders in the world for a very long time.
He also had the help of a couple of doctors who could be described with a word beginning with D, which is dodgy. I think it's fair to say.
True, although
important context.
Most of the, if we're talking
some of them still work, I think, with the team.
Let's not get into that either, Johnny. If you dig far enough into any of these teams, past about 2011, you're going to find dodginess. And a lot of the individuals involved are still around. Again, that's an entire rabbit hole that we could dive into, that we could spend hours talking about. So I don't want to spend too much on it now.
Fair enough.
But if you're going to use the Lance Armstrong thing, it was a level playing field, right? It's Vincent Lavenue versus Lefebvre had the same type of doctor.
We're getting into the weeds now. I'm sorry I've done this. This is my fault.
My point is, for all his flaws, and they are numerous, they are myriad, he has been very successful at finding these athletes and turning them into winners. And I think that, therefore, when he says that about Remco, I do say that's possible, right? Marc Matteo has said that about a couple different French riders over the years. And,
says about every rider.
Yeah,
as long as they're French.
It's never been true. So anyway, we well done pointing that out, Kit, because I do think meeting both Lefebvre and let's briefly, we do meet Ralph Aldag, who's the
who we saw crying last year when Jai Hindley won a stage.
Yeah.
And actually, Rolf Alleg's a good example of, as you said last episode, a team boss who has handed out bottles.
Yes.
True. Yeah.
And Lefebvre.
So,
yes.
He has.
Yep.
They all have. That's the point.
They all for cameras only. So Rolf Aldag, we meet him very briefly. We basically just learn, hey, I just got a bunch more money.
Yeah.
And
Quiet German man.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm genuinely intrigued to see what that team still does. But again, we are now a year on from that fancy launch at the Red Bull facility, and they have done nothing. Yeah. So we're still waiting on that big shift. Anything else from episode 2?
I've got one note written down. There's a scene with Vingegaard in a car where I think he's talking. It's not Franz Massens. It's the other one who now works for the football club. What's his name? Yeah. The really good one. What was his name? I should know this. How have I come prepared without the name of this guy? Visma Sports Director. Quick Google. It will give me Meren Zeeman.
Oh, yeah.
Thank God. That was a
Who was frequently in the last 2 seasons.
Yes, because he got banned or something he couldn't take part in one of the final stages. I can't remember. Yeah, there was that whole scene. Remember? Supposedly, like one of the masterminds, definitely behind Visma's Tour de France resurgence, has now departed to the football realm. Not departed entirely. That was close. But Vingegaard turns to him and says, and it's one of the more realistic moments, despite the cameras being there. At least that's how I, felt it. Where Vingegaard says, "I always feel like the more people doubt me, the better I perform."
Yeah.
And which is especially interesting because we're just, as at the time of recording, coming off the back of a Dauphiné where Pogačar kind of steamrolled Vingegaard because Vingegaard's coming off another crash at Paris-Nice earlier this year and working his way back towards form. So it gives me hope for the Tour de France. It also is a good and real insight into the mind of Jonas Vingegaard, which sometimes we struggle to get.
Do you remember he was so quiet and so reserved after that first Tour de France, or during that first Tour de France that he won in 2022? Yeah. We were saying afterwards, I would not be surprised. I said it, I'm sure. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't win a Tour de France again because he was crushed by the focus that was on him. And but he did then come back with a good deal more confidence, and he has grown as a person, or at least in the spotlight, he has developed as a person and a character. I saw that too, and I was like, interesting. This in the current context as well. That is good. I also felt like that. I don't know what car that was, but the seats in it looked particularly souped up, but to a degree at which he looked like he was in a child's seat, a booster seat. He looked so small. Yep. It made me smile.
Jonas Vingegaard is quite small. Incredibly small human being.
He's so small.
Yeah, he is itty bitty.
That's the thing. And then I've got if we have nothing else, I've got my best and worst moments.
Yeah, bring it.
Let's do it. Best and worst moments.
Worst moment, we get our first day by day uttered by none other than Patrick Lefebvre, which is didn't like that. I didn't like it, but I'm glad that people get to experience that because then that becomes part of the in jokes that we have when we're talking about it. Day by day, you can't win the Tour there, but you can lose it. Like all the bullshit filler words, phrases.
Yeah, that's coming.
The gravel
stage is coming.
Oh yeah, God, that's basically half the episode. My favourite moment is the time when they cover the time trial, and you see the riders behind the scenes. I think beforehand, and they're always taking the piss out of all their ridiculous helmets. Because last year at the Tour de France was when we started seeing the time trial helmets get so out of hand.
But
good point. And Wout van Aert just explaining, because those Visma ones are just ridiculous when they point
a
up.
Mushroom.
Yeah, and he says...
It looks like the Spaceballs, like Darth Vader helmet.
Yeah, and Wout van Aert, you can hear him say he always like hits himself when he walks through doors because he's already quite tall, and then I can just imagine him just going through with like what is an inexpensive time trial helmet, just absolutely battering it. So by the time he gets to the start hut, it's lost any sort of safety feature whatsoever. It's just cracked to smithereens, but just still aero. So that was fun. I'm glad that the riders agree. This is the same in episode 1 with Arkea being like, we can't win. I'm glad that oftentimes what we're thinking isn't incorrect because we're all looking at those helmets being like, you look stupid. And they agree, but it's just, part of the
But they wear
job.
them anyway.
Yeah.
They wear them anyway. Those helmets, we're pretty sure that helmet was designed very specifically for Jonas Vingegaard in his position. And so it probably makes him much faster, but we're not actually totally convinced it makes any of his teammates much faster.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Just to channel Ronan for a moment, one of our colleagues. Yeah. Kit, do you have a good and a bad for us?
One of the most, I don't know about insightful because it's true, but one of the more, I don't know, one of the moments that stood out for me, let's say, was when we saw Mika Landa very briefly actually, but when they were at the team camp in Sierra Nevada, we met Mika Landa, who did he joined the team for last year, didn't he, or was it the year before?
No,
but he joined. So he joined the team for 2024, or from 2024 to expressly to be Evenepoel's right-hand man at the Tour de France, which he did with aplomb. He
particularly on stage 4.
Yeah. But so the moment that I was thinking of in particular was when they were sitting at the table and Evenepoel had just made an espresso for somebody for Landa, and then the DS says he supplies the question from Netflix. So how about the tour or whatever it is? And he says, and Evenepoel says, I'm looking forward to it. And they cut to Mika Landa and he goes, it's going to be really hard. And Evenepoel's like, yeah, but and then he goes, you're going to have more bad days than good days.
Yeah. It was
and
good.
It's like, and that was a good.
He was the best character in this.
He was a natural, Mika Landa.
Yeah, and I
doesn't surprise me.
I feel ashamed that we didn't mention him yet.
Yeah, but he's also kind of come out of a shell in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that fantastic moment was it a Vuelta or was it at the Tour when he's riding alongside Evenepoel and he looks at the camera and we've seen his side eye before, but he's really, I think he's coming into kind of he works oddly enough. I mean, he's a Basque rider on the most Belgian team. In
but
cycling.
It works.
And
it
really
works.
seems to work. Yeah. Sadly, we won't be seeing him this year after his crash at the Giro.
Yeah, really.
He's another one who this is a couple years ago now, but he told me to my face that he did not speak English. And he clearly, we've known this for a while. Clearly, definitely speaks English, which is something that the Spanish riders, Italian French riders,
I think
didn't speak English
enough.
to you.
Fair enough. It's like it's
you missed the last bit.
A good excuse. Like bad weather, they can have it. I reckon.
Yeah.
I respect that.
I agree. Yeah, I thought Landa was he was the most honest.
Yeah.
Of anybody that we've saw in this episode, or maybe even in the show so far.
Yeah, I felt like he was actually saying what he thought rather than necessarily what somebody was telling him.
Which was really nice. Which provided really important context, I think, for Remco's attempt to win this Tour de France.
Yeah.
And then we see him doing a phenomenal job for Remco on the Glibier on that stage 4 in this episode. And I think I hope he comes back in future episodes as Remco attempts to do this thing. Because if you recall from last year's tour, there were times at which it looked like Remco could potentially hang with these two guys, right? And of course he goes on to win that time trial. So at this point in the race, it was all to play for.
Yeah, that's another. So I just before we wrap up, that is something that is that because we've mentioned before that the chronology is sometimes completely out of whack and confusing. But we have had a bit of chronology so far, and what is nice about the end of this episode, we get to the end of the time towards episode 7 stage 7.
Yeah.
So we've got to the end, almost the end of the first week, and we've still got 4 riders who are within touching distance. They are in the GC conversation, and that I had forgotten. Frankly.
And that included a massive mountain stage, and that's stage 4, which is relatively rare that we get a mountain stage of that magnitude that early in the race. Usually they don't do that because you could end the race on stage 4, and that's not good TV. But they did it this time, and it kind of worked out.
Yeah, the gaps weren't significant, especially when in hindsight as well.
Yeah. So that is enough on episode 2. We've gotten ourselves, GC-wise, we've gotten ourselves up to stage 7, the time trial. We've seen what happens there. We've seen Remco have a great day. We've already seen Roglic have sort of varying degrees of days. We've gone over the Glibier. That's where we are at this point.
Yeah.
We've skipped a whole bunch of stages in the pursuit of getting to stage 7 on the GC. And episode 3, which is called Adapt or Die in the English language version.
That's
Lord.
what Caley says to us in our quarterly appraisals.
Yep, adapt or die. really briefly, can I mention something? I meant to mention this in the first episode and forgot. Some people, when you turn this on, you will get a dubbed version.
Oh yes.
The dubbed version is horrible. Okay, so in your Netflix settings, you need to turn that off and you need to go to the subtitles. It is so much better. The dubbing is not good. It's weird. Turn it off. Get the subtitles with the real audio. As a random aside.
What you're hinting at, Caley, is that if you were bored of hearing from the main protagonist, the superstars of the sport in episode 2, don't worry, because we're going back to a borderline irrelevant French psychodrama in episode 3. I think episode 3. I think I've watched like half of these so far. I got to 5. I think episode 3 is my favorite so far. Genuinely,
you like a controversy.
I love a good French. Yeah.
It's
good stuff.
Not to give our points away before we watch it, but there is just so much melodrama, and it's also somehow so camp. I don't really understand. It's just like there's so much brooding and I don't know. It's just mad.
What a cliffhanger on our part. Yeah. Make sure you tune in to the next episode. We are now going to head into After Dark. Of course, this is for members only. This is where we pull back the curtain even further, talk a little bit more about what we saw and heard and believe and etc. And if you are a member of Escape Collective, you get access to After Dark. It's a longer version of this episode, of every episode, really.
Extra, yeah.
Not only do you get that by being a member, you get access to all of our content over the course of the summer, all of July, all of the Tour de France Femme, all of our reporting, all of our journalism from the ground, the full editions of our daily Tour de France podcasts, get access to our member purchase program, which if you're buying anything bike related, it saves you a bunch of money. You get a special price for being a member of Escape Collective. You can go check out the details of that on the website. Head to escapecollective.com/join. Sign yourself up. Don't miss out on a fantastic summer of bike racing. With that, let's head into After Dark.